Hermès filed a complaint against Mason Rothschild, an NFT artist, for his NFT Birkin bags. These NFTs depict Birkin bags in various different renditions, artistic renditions. My name is Amir with Adibi IP Group, providing intellectual property services to innovators. Now, as a lot of you know, Birkin bags are a very famous type of Hermès bag. Hermès has several design patents, trademarks on these bags. They're very, very distinctive and a very strong brand of Hermès. At issue here is whether or not these non-fungible tokens, these NFTs that were created by Rothschild, violate Hermès intellectual property rights. Hermès brought several claims in their complaint, including trademark infringement, false designation of origin, common law trademark rights. Hermès has several trademarks on their Birkin bags, including trade dress. So not just the word Birkin, but also the shape and look of the bag itself. And so in their complaint, what they're asserting is effectively that because they own this trade dress, because they own these trademarks, a consumer would be confused that perhaps these NFTs were produced and generated and provided by Hermès, which is not the case. Hermès never gave any sort of authorization to this artist to create these NFTs. One consideration is what would happen if Hermès wanted to create their own NFTs around some of their popular bags. What if Hermès wanted to create their own Birkin bag NFTs? The issue here is whether or not they would still be able to, given the fact that there's this artist out there that's already created these NFTs that are of these Birkin bags already. One would expect that because Hermès owns these trademarks on their physical goods, has invested significantly on developing their Birkin bags and developed the brand, that they should also be able to extend their protection into Web3 spaces and create their own NFTs. One of the reasons why this litigation is so important is that Hermès has spent significant amount of money, time, effort, and resources in building out the Birkin bag brand, to the point that individuals are willing to spend tens of thousands of dollars for these physical bags in order to display a certain level of socioeconomic status and wealth. In effect, it's a form of flexing, of showing off, of presenting yourself in a certain way to the public. Now, this is extended into the Web3 sphere, the metaverse, whatever you want to call it. It's all about presenting and displaying a certain amount of socioeconomic status. Now here, what's interesting is that this NFT artist is using the same symbol. Granted, it's not a physical symbol, but it's the same Hermès symbol that is displayed in their physical goods. It's just being analogized to the Web3 sphere, to the digital sphere. And so it's particularly interesting because one would expect that the same individuals that are willing to spend tens of thousands on a physical Hermès Birkin bag may very well also be willing to spend tens of thousands on a digital MetaBirkin bag. And that has already proved to be the case because the original MetaBirkin bag was purchased for $20,000 or so dollars and quickly sold for twice that. And so it's very instructive in this case because there's a lot of fashion brands out there, and a lot of fashion brands that have also spent significant resources on building out their brands, that spend significant amount of resources in building physical goods, the same physical goods that people are purchasing to display this status symbol. And so this case is very important because those fashion houses, they may very well also be wanting to enter the Web3 space in order to create digital goods where they can further monetize their brand. The sheer quantity of MetaBirkin bags that Rothschild put out into the world also creates even more incentive for Hermès to take action because, again, each of these NFTs are selling for quite a bit of ETH. There's significant money at stake and significant money at issue here because many of these NFTs were minted. It very well may be the case that had Rothschild only minted that single very first MetaBirkin NFT and no additional MetaBirkin NFTs, this case may not even exist. May not. On the other hand, one of the great conflicts here is whether or not this is a truly visual artistic work that is protected and not an example of infringement of intellectual property rights of Hermès. And so this is probably an area where policy may come into play, where lawmakers may decide to create either carve-outs, exceptions, or rules to protect artists. Now, traditionally, especially in the copyright space, the fair use defense, a very famous defense, is not an affirmative right. In other words, there's no bright line for it. It's very subjective, very fact-intensive. And so one area where lawmakers may want to explore is creating bright line rules, one way or the other, preferably in preference of trying to protect and maintain parties' intellectual property rights.
Perfect.
Rothschild posted a response on his Instagram page to Hermès. And in the response, Rothschild compares this to Andy Warhol's famous Campbell Soup painting. And as you guys may be aware, Andy Warhol had a painting of several Campbell Soup cans displayed on a canvas. It's generally accepted that Andy Warhol's famous painting at the time probably did constitute an infringement of Campbell Soup's intellectual property rights. However, what's interesting is that Campbell Soup never filed a complaint against Andy Warhol for the painting. In fact, quite the opposite. Campbell Soup embraced Andy Warhol's painting, probably because it also gave the company more marketing for their famous soup. And so that's the key difference between that case and this case. In that case, the intellectual property holder effectively gave the okay. This is really true for every intellectual property holder. Intellectual property can be used and infringed, but if the intellectual property right holder doesn't take action, then it doesn't matter because the artist can get away with it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the artist is not infringing upon someone's intellectual property rights. In other words, had Hermès just, for example, walked away, then Rothschild probably would have gotten away with making these NFTs and possibly future ones. But the fact that Hermès decided to take action is a really important distinction from the Campbell Soup painting. Had Campbell Soup decided to take action, they probably would have prevailed. Another thing that is really interesting about the comparison between the Campbell Soup painting and the MetaBirkin NFT is just the era that we live in. So the Andy Warhol Campbell Soup painting was painted in the early 60s, 1962. Very different times than today of NFTs. Now, you also have to think about the fact that not everyone had cell phones back then, not everyone had digital media that was readily accessible on a computer like we do today. And so today, NFTs make it so that anyone on their phone, basically anything that has a display, they can actually show off their NFTs. And anyone, even if not in their presence, because it's all based on the blockchain, can actually see and identify who owns what. Given the fact that we live in this digital era where these items are so prevalent and accessible, it makes things very different because now someone that has one of these MetaBirkins will be able to show off to the world that they have a MetaBirkin. Whereas back then, it would have been very difficult to show off that someone owned a painting. It wasn't as publicly accessible as an NFT or any sort of digital content is today. Hopefully this video helped inform you guys on this very interesting case, the MetaBirkin case involving Hermès and Rothschild. Again, prevalent NFT artist creating visual representations of a very famous and exclusive brand, but in digital media in the Web3 space as an NFT. This case and how it turns out is going to impact a lot of fashion houses, but also just really prevalent, strong, physical, good brands because a lot of them are going to want to enter and have already started entering the digital space. It's important to remember that I'm not your lawyer and this is not legal advice. And if you are interested in entering this space or possibly minting your own NFTs, I highly encourage you to seek intellectual property counsel.